Great Depression and its impact on Washington State. To understand what the effect of the Great Depression was on Washington State, we need to understand what the Great Depression was and how it impacted the country. Impact of the Great Depression. The Great Depression was one of the greatest turning points in history. The Great Depression started August 1929. The impact of the Great Depression caused many people to suffer, lose jobs, and face poverty. The Great Depression was an economic crisis that lasted from 1929 to 1941. The Great Depression started when the Wall Street crash happened in New York 1929, then traveled through the U.S. The loss of jobs led to loss of homes, food, and clothing. During the Great Depression, after the people lost their homes, they had no choice but to build shacks and live in towns called Hoovervilles. Between the years of 1929 to 1939, men waited in soup lines for food. That was the time of anxiety, frustration, hopelessness, and anger. Failed government policies led to extending the Great Depression. Hoover's personal policy of not letting the government put too much power on the Great Depression failed. He relied on businesses to figure out their own problems and relied on employers not to lay off employees. How did the Great Depression affect Washington State? In Washington State, people were no longer giving out construction jobs. Lumber stopped and banks failed because no money could be provided by the banks for the people. Washington's lumber drowned from 7.3 billion boards in 1929 and fell to a devastating number in 1932, which was 2.2 billion boards, and more than half of the workers were let go. The workers who stayed had their pay go down. The banks were unable to keep up with the withdrawals. President D. Roosevelt declared a bank holiday for March 6th and March 13th, which through it all was a whole week. This decision was made out of stress because all of the earned morals in the banks would be hard to use. The Great Depression caused a housing crisis. People lost their homes, way of life, and employment. Hooverville was made by the people who did not have any homes. The people's only shelter that the people had were shacks that they had to build out of their own resources. A man by the name of Jesse Jackson was the mayor of Seattle and organized Seattle's version of Hooverville. People lived in what were called shacks. According to Mr. Jackson, the used to be mayor of Seattle at that time, quote, "The shacks in Hooverville are built out of every sort of material, and all sorts of architecture is followed, as it suits the taste of the builder and the material he had to build it from. Some are no bigger than piano boxes, and some have 5 rooms." End quote. Shacks were built for shelter and were built in a town called Hooverville. Hooverville was a shanty town where many people roamed through and lived in their shacks. People named the place Hooverville because their former president, Mr. Herbert Clark Hoover, made the policies that failed and made the Great Depression even worse. Rebuilding of Washington State happened because President Roosevelt made a policy called New Deal Act. This funded the Grand Coulee Dam and jump-started the rebuild of the economy. Quoted from the article, Great Depression in Washington State, Grand Coulee Dam, Leaving a Legacy by Christian McClung. In September of 1937, Kellogg Evening News said, quote, "An average of nearly $800,000 a month was paid this spring to workers employed by the Mason Walsh Atkinson Kier Company, Grand Coulee Contractors. The Bureau of Reclamation was disclosed." End quote. When the employment figures were totaled from 1933 through 1939, the Bureau of Reclamation histories put the total man-hours at 37,119,000 and compensation at 34,650,244. Total cost figures for the construction of the dam from the time period of 1933 through 1986 is estimated at $1,687,000. The event that brought the people out of the Depression was World War II. World War II created jobs in Washington and around the globe. According to the Library of Congress webpage, quote, "When Japan attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7, 1941, the United States found itself in the war it had sought to avoid for more than 2 years." Mobilizing the economy for World War finally cured the Depression. Millions of men and women joined the armed forces, and even larger numbers went to work in well-paying defense jobs. End quote. The impact of the Second World War was economically good for Washington State and the U.S. because it employed many men and women. The people finally got the money to buy houses once they got employed to serve in the war or to make bombs. In conclusion, the Great Depression was the biggest turning point in history because it hurt many people. It caused businesses to crash, and the only event to bring it out of it was World War II. Thanks to President D. Roosevelt and the New Deal, along with the impact of the Second World War, the Great Depression ended with employment, and people that used to live in shacks live in houses again.